Bijan Robinson is the worst pick in the first round of 2023 fantasy football drafts. That's right. Today we are talking the worst pick in every round of 2023 fantasy drafts. But I'm not just going to sit here and say, don't draft this guy, don't draft that guy. I'm also going to give you multiple alternatives for each round of guys you should be drafting in 2023 fantasy football. Get it? Got it? Good. Let's go. The worst pick in the first round of 2023 fantasy football drafts is Bijan Robinson. Now let me preface with this. Bijan Robinson is a stud. He's one of the best running back prospects to enter the NFL in recent seasons, and he's going to have a great career. Heck, he's going to have a productive rookie season. But we're taking him in the top 10 of non-dynasty fantasy football drafts? Absolutely not. The first round of fantasy football drafts is reserved for the proven studs. After all, this is our most precious asset for the 2023 season. Do we really want to use that on a guy who has never stepped on an NFL field? I don't think so. And sure, he's on a run-focused offense, but that isn't necessarily a good thing for fantasy football. And yes, even for running backs. I did a study on this last offseason, and I discovered that in 2021, 67% of top 12 running backs played in an offense with a neutral game script pass ratio above the league average. In 2020, that number was 58%. I haven't looked at that data yet for last year, but I assume it'll be about the same. The Falcons are rolling out Desmond Ridder at quarterback and are nearly a lock to finish bottom 5 in pass attempts. Even if you ignore my study, we still have to be concerned about this for Bijan Robinson because half of the reason you're drafting him is for his receiving skills. How is he supposed to be one of the top receiving backs if his team isn't passing? And when they are passing, he has to contend with Drake London and Kyle Pitts for targets. But what about touchdowns? Is anyone projecting the Falcons to be one of the top scoring offenses in the NFL? No. Or even above league average? Unlikely. So then if we can't expect elite receiving production and we can't expect a ton of touchdowns, what are we doing? We're just counting on a bunch of rushing yards? That's not enough to be the high-end fantasy performer that is expected from a running back with a top 10 ADP. So instead, I'm drafting Stephon Diggs. He's been a top 12 wide receiver in 5 of the last 6 seasons and is playing in one of the league's most pass-friendly offenses. Or A.J. Brown, who was the wide receiver 8 in his first season in Philly, and he's tied to Jalen Hurts. I'm also considering CeeDee Lamb, who is the wide receiver 7 in 2022. And if I really need to use an early pick on a running back, I can take someone like Tony Pollard or Nick Chubb in round 2. Both play in better offenses and have higher upside at a 1-round discount. The worst pick in the second round of 2023 fantasy football drafts is Garrett Wilson. And his ADP is at 13.5, so he's barely outside the first. But Garrett Wilson was awesome in his rookie season. And that was while playing with an ugly combination of Zach Wilson, Mike White, and Joe Flacco at quarterback. Now he gets a quarterback upgrade with Aaron Rodgers coming over from Green Bay. But while the efficiency of the passes thrown his way will surely improve, Garrett Wilson is far from the lock for that second-year breakout that many are penciling him in for. I mean, for one, Aaron Rodgers' Packers have been in the bottom half of the league in pass attempts per game in each of the last 4 seasons. They averaged 33.4 pass attempts per game over that span. That happens in part because Aaron Rodgers runs his offense at such a slow pace. He is obsessed with making sure he has the perfect play at the line before snapping the ball. That brings the play clock down within 5 seconds on the majority of snaps. And as a result, the Packers were 31st, 32nd, 30th, and 26th in pace of play over that 4-year stretch. Adding insult to injury, the Jets defense might be pretty good this year, which will also contribute to keeping the pass attempts lower than we'd like for fantasy football. The team could be nursing leads or playing in tight games that don't require a ton of additional passing, especially with the return of Breece Hall and the possible acquisition of Dalvin Cook. Meanwhile, the Jets added mild target competition by bringing in Aaron Rodgers' pals, Allen Lazard, and Randall Cobb from Green Bay. With an ADP of 13th overall, Garrett Wilson will need to have a 30% target share to make him worth that pick. It's certainly not out of his range of outcomes, but why take the chance when he's going ahead of both Amon-Ra St. Brown and Devontae Adams? It makes no sense. So instead, I'm drafting Amon-Ra St. Brown. He was the wide receiver 10 in 2022. He's a proven target machine in a fast-paced, high-volume offense. Or Devontae Adams, who's a top 5 wide receiver in each of the last 3 seasons, and he hasn't finished outside the top 12 since 2015. I'm also considering Nick Chubb at the top of the second round. He's a workhorse running back in a good offense and is expected to see an increase in targets and red zone opportunities. He's the best pure runner in football, and he's finished as a top 10 running back in 4 straight seasons. By the way, the ADPs in this video are coming from Underdog Fantasy, the best platform for drafting. I'm literally drafting on Underdog every single day, whether it be a quick draft or a slow draft, a mini $3 league, or the Best Ball Mania tournament where the winner takes home $3 million. It's the perfect way to win some money while refining your drafting skills ahead of your home league drafts. And I've also been dipping my toes into their season-long pick'em props. I love the Underdog platform, and I know you will too, so sign up now and use promo code YARDSPER to get a $100 first-time deposit match, and then I'll see you in a draft room. The worst pick in the third round of 2023 fantasy football drafts is Calvin Ridley. The last time we got a full season from Calvin Ridley, he produced a wide receiver 4 season in 2020. But that included a lot of volume-fueled production in a year where Matt Ryan led the NFL in pass attempts and Julio Jones only played 9 games. Outside of that, Calvin Ridley has never reached 900 yards in a season, and he's maxed out as the wide receiver 18 in 2019. In the 5 games we got from him in 2021, Calvin Ridley struggled with efficiency. He averaged under 1.5 yards per route, and he barely topped 9 yards per reception. And his average target distance was under 10 yards. And then things kind of go weird. Ridley stepped away from football to focus on his mental health, and then he was suspended for the entire 2022 season for betting on NFL games. Now he's returning at age 29, 2 years since he last stepped on an NFL field, and 3 years since we last got a productive season from him, and on a new team. Yet his ADP suggests that he is a lock to pick up right where he left off. But I don't think he's just going to walk into Jacksonville and take over the wide receiver 1 job uncontested. And even if he is considered the wide receiver 1, he has real target competition. Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, and Evan Ingram all had career years in 2022. They're not going away. And they're all making more money than Calvin Ridley for whatever that's worth. I'm not trying to argue that Calvin Ridley is going to be a flop in Jacksonville. And actually, all indications are he's going to have a good season. My argument is that he is not worth that 3rd round ADP. Based on everything we've discussed, he should be going multiple rounds later. I would be comfortable considering him in round 6 or round 7, but as someone who is costing a 3rd round pick right now, count me out on Calvin Ridley for 2023. Instead, I'm drafting DK Metcalf. He had over 140 targets last season. Or Breece Hall. He's a stud running back with a bell cow skill set and in a good offense. Another wide receiver I'm looking at in that 3rd round is Keenan Allen, who averaged more than 16 fantasy points per game in 2022. And he's been a top 13 wide receiver in 6 straight seasons. And he's got Justin Herbert at quarterback in a high volume, high scoring offense. And if I'm going to be drafting a Jaguars wide receiver, it's going to be Christian Kirk in round 5. He led the team in receiving last season, and he has an established chemistry with Trevor Lawrence. He could absolutely again lead that team in targets. The worst pick in the 4th round of 2023 fantasy football drafts is Jahmyr Gibbs. The Jahmyr Gibbs hype is everywhere right now. He's certainly looking every bit the part in his training camp highlights. However, his ADP at the 3-4 turn is something I just cannot get behind. I'm having a hard time with it because I expect Dave Montgomery to be pretty heavily involved. Montgomery's going to get a lot of that Jamal Williams role from last season. He's going to dominate the between the tackles carries and the red zone work. He's also going to be more involved in the receiving game than Jahmyr Gibbs drafters would like to admit. Still, Jahmyr Gibbs projects for around 50 receptions during his rookie season. But if you're expecting him to get a ton of work on the ground like his ADP suggests, you're going to be disappointed. He was a committee back in college, and he's going to be a committee back in the NFL. I anticipate Jahmyr Gibbs will see somewhere around 7, 8, 10 carries per game, which will be enough to threaten top 24 territory, but not quite to the RB12 price tag that he's currently going for. So if you're looking for a running back at the 3-4 turn, just go with Breece Hall in round 3. You can also find Joe Mixon in round 4, who's going to give you those 50-plus receptions, but it's also going to give you more carries and touchdowns. Or if you really want a piece of this Lions backfield, just take Dave Montgomery around 7 or 8. I expect the per game fantasy production to be quite similar between Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, and yet their ADPs are 4 rounds apart. Montgomery's available in the 8th round on Underdog. When selecting him, we're doing it over guys like Quentin Johnston, George Pickens, Gabe Davis, and Isaiah Pacheco. For Gibbs, we're having to decide on him versus guys like Najee Harris, Christian Watson, Travis Etienne, Joe Burrow, and Jerry Jeudy. That is a massive difference. The worst pick in the 5th round of 2023 fantasy football drafts is Alexander Mattison. Call me a skeptic, but I don't believe Alexander Mattison is a lock to just slide into that Dalvin Cook role uncontested. I mean, he's a career backup with no standout athletic traits. And sure, he's been a high volume guy in spot starts over the years, but that was in the Mike Zimmer era. Yes, the old, crusty, throwback Mike Zimmer, who's perfectly happy with that 3 yards on a cloud of dust. That's why Alexander Mattison was that prototypical Mike Zimmer running back. A big grinder who gets what's blocked and nothing more. Alexander Mattison has averaged under 4 yards per carry in each of the last 2 seasons, and he's had just 5 runs reach 15 yards or more on his last 208 carries. In fact, let's read this tweet from Rich Rebar. It says, over the last 2 seasons, 74 running backs have had 100 or more rushing attempts. Among those running backs, Alexander Mattison ranks 68th in yards per carry, 45th in success rate, 43rd in explosive run rate, and 42nd in yards after contact per carry. And he's certainly not adding any value as a pass catcher. In 2022, Alexander Mattison averaged 0.73 yards per route, which ranked 84th among all NFL running backs per player profiler. And when fantasy football analysts talk about dead zone running backs, this is who they're talking about. Mattison is only being drafted this high because of opportunity. It's not because of skill. Nobody thinks Alexander Mattison is a super talented running back. They're drafting him because of his situation. That's a dangerous game to play, my friend. In fact, the most carries that Alexander Mattison has ever seen in a season is 134. He could be asked to double that in 2023. And I'm not even sure he's the best pure runner on the Vikings roster. I mean, the team just drafted Dwayne McBride in the 7th round. Out of all running backs who were drafted in 2023, it's Dwayne McBride who ran for the most yards last season. He had a career average of 7.4 yards per carry during his time at UAB. McBride is a power back just like Mattison who runs with good vision, but he adds some quickness and agility to make defenders miss in the open field, something that Alexander Mattison doesn't. And while we're talking about bad draft picks in every round, Alexander Mattison in round 5 may be the worst of the worst. So instead, I'm drafting Kenneth Walker. He's a big, talented, explosive runner in a good offense. Or a couple wide receivers like Chris Godwin, who's undervalued and is going to be a target magnet. And Deontay Johnson is the most obvious bounce back candidate in 2023. He's not going to be held out of the touchdown column again. And if I really want to get a piece of this Vikings offense, I'm going to take TJ Hawkinson. He was a target machine once he joined the Vikings last season. And the team could absolutely be top 3 in pass attempts. And then I can find a running back multiple rounds later like Cam Akers, Rashad White, or David Montgomery. But before we continue talking about the worst picks in 2023 fantasy football, if you're enjoying this video and find it at all valuable, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I'll be pumping out content like this all summer long. And leave me a comment. Let me know what you want me to talk about next. The worst pick you can make in the 6th round of 2023 fantasy football drafts is Mike Evans. Mike Evans was tough to roster in fantasy football last season, yet he finished strong and actually had the most receiving yards of his 3 years with Tom Brady. However, a lot of that was fueled by pure volume. I mean, he only saw 19.7% of the targets, but Brady attempted a massive 751 passes. Efficiency was still a problem for Evans, though, as it has been for the last few years, but this time he didn't have the touchdowns to make up for it. He only scored 6 times after combining for 27 over the previous 2 seasons, and 3 of those came in 1 game. He ranked 33rd in yards per route, 26th in yards per target, and 29th in yards per team pass attempt. He also won on just 41% of his routes, which ranked 45th among wide receivers, according to playerprofiler.com. For fantasy football, the final numbers looked nice, but Mike Evans scored 35% of his fantasy points in just 2 games. He only finished as a top 12 wide receiver 3 times, and on the flip side, he scored outside the top 30 on 10 occasions, with half of those landing outside the top 40. Now Tom Brady is retired and Baker Mayfield is the presumed starter for 2023. And Mayfield has historically struggled to push the ball to the boundary with consistency. And that won't bode well for Mike Evans as his game is focused in those areas. So instead, I'm drafting someone like Tyler Lockett. He's finished as wide receiver 16, wide receiver 13, wide receiver 8, 16, and 13 over the last 5 years. Or I could draft his teammate, Jackson Smith-Njigba, who's an ultra-talented rookie wide receiver who outproduced both Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave when the 3 played together at Ohio State. Jason has already created a long highlight reel of plays at training camp. He's going to be heavily involved as a rookie. And Jordan Addison will also be heavily involved as a rookie. There's going to be a lot of passing volume in Minnesota, with most of that funneled to Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, and Jordan Addison. So I would consider Jordan Addison in the 6th round as well. The worst pick in the 7th round of 2023 fantasy football drafts is Quentin Johnston. Quentin Johnston got the sexy landing spot with the Chargers in the NFL draft. His pairing with quarterback Justin Herbert has propelled him into the 7th round of ADP. That ADP seems to be ignoring the fact that Quentin Johnston is still behind both Keenan Allen and Mike Williams in the pecking order. And despite him declaring himself the wide receiver 3 during spring camp, Johnston has yet to overtake Josh Palmer, and it may be a while before he gets there. Early on in training camp, Johnson seems to be struggling with drops. It's an issue that plagued him in college. He dropped 8 passes in 13 games last season, and he dropped multiple passes during his pro day as well. But drops aside, Johnson really wasn't that impressive as a prospect, despite his first-round draft capital. It was a slow progression to his 1,000-yard 2022 campaign, and even that left a little bit to be desired. He only averaged 4 receptions per game, and his 18% touchdown share came in at about half of what we look for incoming wide receiver prospects. Some want to crown him the next DK Metcalf or Mike Williams, but his playstyle just does not fit that comp. Despite his 6'3" frame, Johnson is not a dominant contested catch guy. Instead, he tends not to high point the ball, letting it come to him and opening it up to be played by the defender. And he's going to need to develop his route tree beyond what he showed at TCU if he's ever going to command targets ahead of Palmer, never mind ahead of Keenan Allen or Mike Williams. His route tree in college focused a lot on vertical routes. He was known as a deep threat, yet his 4.55 40 time does not project as being able to be that type of player against NFL cornerbacks. He is certainly not ready for a full-time starting role in the NFL, making his 7th round ADP quite baffling. So instead, in the 7th round, I'm drafting David Montgomery or Rashad White, or I'm getting my tight end with Dallas Goedert. The worst pick in round 8 of 2023 fantasy football drafts is Kadarius Toney. Kadarius Toney's career has already gotten off to a terrible start. In 2 seasons, he's missed 14 games with 5 separate injuries. And now he's out again with a knee issue and he's questionable for week 1. And in his 2 years, he's averaged 4 targets per game, 2.9 receptions per game, and a whopping 31 receiving yards. And he really wasn't an impressive prospect coming out of Florida either. Some of the most important factors that we look for in wide receiver prospects are college dominator rating, college target share, and breakout age. Toney falls in the 30th percentile or worse in each of those categories, according to Player Profiler. In fact, Kadarius Toney didn't see a double-digit target share until his final season at Florida. It's absolutely wild to see he's still going off the board in the 8th round. But I think his ADP is holding due to 3 things. First-round draft capital, playing with Patrick Mahomes, and 1 fluky game during his rookie season. That's it. There is no logical reason for him to be going this high. So in the 8th round, I will happily draft someone like Brandon Cooks or Isaiah Pacheco instead. And if I really want to draft a Chiefs wide receiver, I'm going to consider Sky Moore in round 9, Rashee Rice in round 12, or Marquez Valdez-Scantling in round 13. The worst pick in the 9th round of 2023 fantasy football drafts is Jameson Williams. The red flags are already stacking up for Jameson Williams just 1 year into his NFL career. First, he missed most of his rookie season while recovering from a college injury, but was shockingly unproductive when he returned. But we'll have more on that later. Then he was suspended 6 games to start his 2nd season for violating the NFL's gambling policy. And then he got injured and he missed the first few practices of training camp. But now he's participating in camp, but he's struggling with negative reports coming out almost daily from Lions beat reporters. Williams has been struggling with drops and other issues in practice, including throwing a punch at a teammate. Now, none of this is directly indicative of his on-field play necessarily, but the constant swirl of negativity around him at this early stage of his career is alarming. Even when he was on the field during his rookie season, Jameson Williams seemed lost and his production suffered. He was active for 6 games from week 13 to week 18. It was the most important stretch of the season for the Lions as they were vying for a playoff spot. And yet Jameson Williams could barely crack the lineup. Over those 6 weeks, Jameson Williams never topped a 25% snap share. He was targeted 9 times and he caught just 1 pass. He never ran more than 9 routes in a game and he scored 0 fantasy points on 4 of his 6 outings. We could chalk some of that up to the ACL recovery, sure, but Williams was far from a clean prospect entering the NFL. Remember, he had just 1 productive season in college and he had to transfer to make that happen. He couldn't get on the field in his first 2 seasons and he combined for just 15 receptions during that time. Now, I'm not ready to declare him a bust just yet, but all the signs are pointing that direction. That's why I'm not even considering drafting him in the single-digit rounds of 2023 fantasy football drafts. He's already going to tie up a roster spot for 6 weeks because of the suspension, and I could swallow that if I knew I was going to be getting a productive player when he came back, but I'm really skeptical of that at this point. I will use my draft capital and precious roster spot elsewhere. I'm fine if I miss out on a breakout because I think it's unlikely. And if it happens, I can always draft him next year. So instead, in round 9, I'm looking at someone like Antonio Gibson or Sky Moore. The worst pick in the 10th round of 2023 fantasy football drafts is Brian Robinson. Brian Robinson finished his rookie season with 205 carries for 797 yards. That's an underwhelming 3.9 yard per carry average. And I know yards per carry is an overrated stat, but we can point to other metrics that show just how inefficient Brian Robinson really was. For example, he reached 15 yards or more on less than 3% of his carries, ranking 46 among qualifying running backs. He was also number 47 in yards created per touch and number 126 in expected points added per player profiler. Brian Robinson had just 1 week as a top 12 scorer for fantasy football, and he finished the year with an average of 9.6 fantasy points per game, which ranked as the RB36. Brian Robinson's going to have to contend with Antonio Gibson for touches in that Washington backfield, and Gibson has been receiving praise and hype from the Commanders coaches all offseason, and he's expected to take on an expanded role. But with or without Antonio Gibson in the picture, Brian Robinson is not a threat to create plays in the passing game. He only caught 9 passes as rookie. And with an underwhelming athletic profile, 0 receiving production, and inefficiency between the tackles, Brian Robinson is looking very dependent on scoring touchdowns if he's going to be playable in fantasy football. Unfortunately, though, he plays in a below-average offense that is not expected to score a lot of points, so the touchdown opportunities will be anything but plentiful. And with the Commanders playing in comeback mode often, the volume of the between the 20s carries is going to vary week to week. So instead of Brian Robinson in round 10, I'd rather have Damian Harris or Samaje Perine. Hey, if you like that video, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, leave a comment on what you want me to talk about next. You can find all my stuff, my rankings, articles, podcasts, more videos like this on yardsperfantasy.com. Just download the Yards Per Fantasy app, and we thank you for your support.